But the southern states were not on the itinerary of the young prince. So he never saw the luxurious facade of the Old South or the sinister foundation of slavery on which it rested. In 1860, there were almost 4 million slaves in the 16 states where slavery was legal and where Negroes were advertised for sale like any other merchandise. Many of the founding fathers of the Republic had deplored this trade in human beings and had hoped that the slaves would slowly be freed. But instead, slavery grew, especially after the invention of the cotton gin. This machine had made cotton growing immensely profitable, leading to huge plantations that wanted more and more Negroes. But slavery tormented the consciences of many Americans, like William Lloyd Garrison, who led a movement for its abolition. For white opponents of slavery, the fact that the country was divided into a slave area and a free area offered an opportunity to do something about it. Over the years, the Underground Railway had been developed, a number of secret routes over which runaway slaves could flee to sanctuary in the North, with the help of sympathizers along the way. But after 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, called kidnapping by its opponents, permitted the pursuit and arrest of runaway slaves who had reached the North. It meant new terrors for those who sought freedom. Public opinion in the North was aroused by ugly incidents involving the activities of the slave catchers. Determined to block enforcement of the law, many Northerners helped to extend the Underground Railway into Canada, where slavery was illegal and where there could be no extradition. Thus, in the 1850s, several thousand slaves who had been hounded across the United States finally found a haven in Canada. Meanwhile, Uncle Tom's Cabin had become the bestseller of the age, with its story of Topsy and Little Eva and its indictment of slavery. And its readers were deeply moved by the plight of Eliza pursued by bloodhounds. In the North, stage plays often dealt with the brutality of slave owners, with their whips and branding irons. Public opinion was inflamed, and there was a claim for crusaders like John Brown, whose anti-slavery raid in Virginia led to his execution and everlasting renown. So great were the passions of the day that Senator Charles Sumner, an abolitionist, was beaten up on the very floor of the Senate. His attacker was Senator Charles Brooks of South Carolina, a man in the tradition of the famous John Calhoun, bitter apologist of the South. Slavery was paternalistic and a positive good, according to John Calhoun. But he also called it a practical necessity if the South was to flourish. For the production of cotton had reached immense proportions, and there were huge fortunes to be made in supplying the mills of New England and Britain. This wealth had given the South the arrogance of a spoiled child. Southern bullying of the North went so far as to involve federal government officials in the Ostend Manifesto, a sinister document calling for the annexation of Cuba, which would become American slave territory. This aggressiveness arose from a vision of the South's manifest destiny, which dreamed of a huge, independent slaveholding area stretching from Kansas down into Latin America. But Abraham Lincoln was determined to prevent the expansion of slavery. This Illinois lawyer was the Republican candidate for the presidency, and many in the South clearly saw him as their nemesis, a man whose ideas would force them to desperate measures. And Lincoln's victory in the critical election of 1860 did hasten the hour of decision for the South. At the same time in Washington, William H. Seward was playing with the idea that provoking a foreign war might serve to avert a civil war in the United States. A leading Republican politician, Seward had often argued that the country must acquire more territory. Seward sounded as though he wanted to expand the United States all the way to the North Pole, and Canada's uneasiness increased when Seward became Lincoln's Secretary of State. Grandiose visions might now become policy. Soon after Lincoln's election, 7 southern states quit the Union, and Jefferson Davis became their president in a convention at Montgomery, Alabama, where they met to create the Confederate States of America. Now there were 2 presidents, 2 nations. But Seward still wondered if the nation's sickness might not be healed by the tonic of expansion. And some northern newspapers saw another solution: abandon the South and take Canada as compensation. But in his inaugural address, President Lincoln made it clear that he wanted peace abroad and rejected a diversionary foreign adventure as a dishonorable way of settling a domestic problem.